Hey there, lovely people. Today, I found a new story for you.
Shocking twist. After vanishing for 3 years, my wife showed up on my doorstep with a baby. What she wanted next left me speechless. It's funny how you can spend years thinking your life is stable, predictable even, only to realize how quickly the ground can shift under you. My name's Michael, and I've been married to Rachel for 8 years. We met in our late 20s, fell hard for each other, and things moved fast. She was everything I thought I wanted in a partner. Ambitious, caring, and always one step ahead with plans. Rachel had this energy about her that made you feel like you were part of something bigger, like her life wasn't just hers. It was a grand plan, and if you were lucky, she'd let you in on it. For years, we built what felt like a great life. Both of us worked decent jobs, hers in marketing and mine as a software engineer. We traveled when we could, spent weekends binge-watching shows or hosting game nights, and were that couple everyone joked about being the perfect match. But the truth is, things really started to feel serious when Rachel began talking about kids. She'd always wanted a big family, 3 kids minimum. She already had names picked out and could spend hours scrolling through baby clothes online, debating whether our future daughter would look better in pastels or bold colors. It was sweet, if a little intense at times. But I loved her enthusiasm, and I figured, why not? I wanted kids too. The idea of us raising a family together felt like the natural next step. We started trying for a baby about 2 years ago. At first, it was exciting, like this big, hopeful adventure we were embarking on together. Rachel downloaded one of those apps to track her ovulation, and we'd plan everything around her cycle. She'd make little jokes about mission baby, and it felt like we were a team. But as the months dragged on, things started to shift. The excitement gave way to frustration, especially for Rachel. Every negative pregnancy test hit her hard. I'd try to comfort her, telling her it was just a matter of time, but I could see how much it weighed on her. She'd plaster on a smile and say things like, "Next month will be our month." But there was a sadness behind her eyes that she couldn't quite hide. After about a year of trying with no luck, we decided to see a doctor. I think we both expected them to say it was just bad timing or stress or something simple that could be fixed. But the tests told a different story. The issue wasn't Rachel, it was me. I remember sitting in the doctor's office, hearing words like low sperm count and reduced motility, and feeling like my entire world had tilted sideways. The doctor explained that while it wasn't impossible for us to conceive naturally, the odds were heavily stacked against us. He started talking about options like IVF and other treatments, but I could barely process what he was saying. All I could think about was how I was letting Rachel down. Rachel tried to be supportive at first. She told me it wasn't my fault, that we'd figure it out together. But there was a tension in her voice that hadn't been there before. I could tell she was holding something back, and I didn't know if it was anger, disappointment, or just sadness. Maybe all three. She threw herself into researching fertility treatments, joining online forums, and even changing our diets to boost our chances. I wanted to do my part, but every time I saw her looking at baby clothes or talking about nursery themes, it felt like a reminder of what I couldn't give her. Looking back, I can see now that this was the first crack in the foundation of our marriage. At the time, I thought we were just navigating a rough patch like any couple would. But there was something about the way Rachel started acting. Little things like how she'd avoid eye contact when we talked about the future or how she'd brush off my attempts to connect with her emotionally. I told myself it was just the stress of everything, that we'd get through it. After all, we loved each other, right? That had to count for something. For a while, I clung to the idea that if we could just make this work, if we could have a baby, everything would go back to the way it was. But I was starting to sense that Rachel didn't see it that way. There was a distance growing between us, one that I couldn't quite put my finger on. And the more I tried to close that gap, the more it felt like she was pulling away. What I didn't realize then was that this wasn't just about us trying to have a baby. There were things happening beneath the surface, things I couldn't see, and they were about to change everything. I remember when Rachel's attitude started to shift. At first, she was so understanding, telling me that we'd figure this out together, that children weren't the only thing that mattered. She even joked about how we could use this time to travel more or focus on our relationship. But it didn't take long for that positivity to evaporate. Looking back, I can't pinpoint the exact moment it started, but I noticed small changes in her. Subtle at first, then unmistakable. Rachel stopped bringing up the future entirely. The names she'd picked out for our hypothetical kids, the ones she'd spent hours debating with me, were never mentioned again. The apps and fertility forums she used to obsess over disappeared from her phone. At first, I thought she was just giving herself a break. All of this had been so emotionally draining, after all. But as weeks turned into months, it became clear that it wasn't just the topic of kids she was avoiding. She started pulling away from me, too. Conversations became shorter, more transactional. Instead of her usual enthusiastic, "How was your day?" When I got home, I'd get a flat, "Hey." She stopped sitting next to me on the couch when we watched TV. She'd curl up in the corner with her phone instead, scrolling endlessly, like I wasn't even there. The warmth between us, the laughter, the little inside jokes, the comfort of being around each other, just disappeared. And it wasn't just emotional distance. Physical affection became rare, almost non-existent. I can't tell you the last time she held my hand or kissed me without it feeling forced. Sex, once an integral and happy part of our relationship, now felt like a memory from another life. I tried to tell myself it was just stress, that maybe she needed space to process everything. But then came the comments. Started small. Rachel would point out little things like how I needed to get my hair cut more often or how I wasn't dressing as sharp as I used to. "You're really letting yourself go, Michael," she said once, offhandedly, as I sat in sweatpants on a Saturday morning. I laughed it off at the time, thinking she was just teasing, but the remarks kept coming. My weight, my posture, even the way I chewed my food. Suddenly, everything I did seemed to annoy her. One evening, after I'd spent an hour cooking dinner, she sat down at the table, picked at her food, and said, "You used to care about presentation, you know? This looks rushed." Couldn't believe it. A year ago, she would have praised me for making the effort, even if it had been peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. Now, nothing I did seemed to be good enough. I started questioning everything about myself. Was I letting myself go? Was I really that unattractive to her now? I knew the fertility issue had hit my confidence hard, but hearing these things from Rachel, my wife, the person who used to love me unconditionally, cut deeper than I thought possible. I tried to talk to her about it, to tell her how her words made me feel, but she always brushed me off. "You're too sensitive," she'd say. Or worse, "I'm just being honest. You should appreciate that." Our relationship felt cold, like we were no longer partners but roommates sharing the same space. We'd pass each other in the kitchen without speaking, eat dinner in silence, and go to bed at different times. I missed her. I missed us. But every time I tried to address the growing distance, she shut me down. "Not everything has to be a deep conversation, Michael," she said once when I asked her why she'd been so distant. "You're overthinking things." I wasn't overthinking anything. I could feel it. This wall between us, growing higher and higher with every passing day. I started spending more time at work, coming home late just to avoid the tension. When I was home, I'd retreat into books or video games, anything to distract myself from the void where our marriage used to be. But no matter how hard I tried to ignore it, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was seriously wrong. The woman who used to love me, who used to dream with me about the future, was now a stranger. And the worst part? I had no idea why. At least not yet. It was a Thursday night when Rachel first brought up the idea of going to New York. We were sitting at the kitchen table, me scrolling through emails on my laptop, her picking at a salad she didn't seem interested in eating. "I think I need a break," she said casually, like she was commenting on the weather. "Maya and the girls are planning a trip to New York, and they invited me. A couple of weeks away might be nice, you know? Clear my head." I looked up, a little surprised. Rachel wasn't the type to take spontaneous trips. She loved planning things down to the last detail, whether it was a weekend getaway or a major vacation. Still, I didn't think too much of it at the time. Maybe she really did need some time away. Things between us had been tense for months, and I thought a change of scenery might do her some good. I wanted to believe this was her way of hitting a reset button, not just for herself but for us. Yeah, of course, I said, trying to sound supportive. That sounds great. When are you thinking of going? Next week, she said, her tone light and breezy. Just for a couple of weeks. Maya and the others already have everything booked, so it's all set. There was a part of me that felt uneasy about it, but I ignored it. This was Rachel, after all. My wife. She'd never given me a reason not to trust her, and if she needed this, who was I to stop her? Over the next few days, I helped her get everything ready. Booking her airport parking, double-checking her flight details, even folding her clothes neatly into her suitcase while she debated which shoes to bring. It felt good to do something nice for her, even if things between us had been rocky. I wanted her to see that I still cared. The day of her flight, I drove her to the airport. She seemed lighter, happier than I'd seen her in a while. She even gave me a quick kiss on the cheek as she grabbed her bags from the trunk. Thanks for everything, she said, flashing me a smile. I'll call you when I land. Have fun, I said, watching as she disappeared through the sliding doors. I sat in the car for a moment, staring at the spot where she just stood, and told myself this was a good thing. Space. She needed space. And maybe when she came back we could finally talk, really talk about everything that had been weighing us down. But Rachel never called me when she landed. At first, I thought it was just a busy travel day. Maybe she'd forgotten or her phone had died. I sent her a quick text. Hey, just checking in. Hope your flight went well. Let me know when you're settled. Hours passed with no response. I didn't want to be the overbearing husband, so I left it alone and went to bed, expecting to hear from her the next day. The next day came and went, and still nothing. I called her phone, but it went straight to voicemail. By the second day, I was starting to worry. I texted her again, then tried calling Maya, one of the friends she said she was traveling with. Maya picked up on the first ring. Hey Maya, I said, trying to sound casual even though my stomach was twisting in knots. Just wanted to check in about the trip. Did you guys get there okay? Rachel hasn't been responding. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Trip? Maya finally said, sounding confused. What trip? The New York trip? I said, my voice faltering. Rachel said you guys were flying out together. Another pause. Then Maya laughed, but not in a way that made me feel any better. Michael, I don't know what Rachel told you, but I'm not in New York. I haven't spoken to her in weeks. I hung up without saying much else. My hands were shaking as I tried calling Rachel again. Straight to voicemail. Over and over. I called her other friends. The ones she'd mentioned were going on the trip. Same story. None of them had any idea what I was talking about. By the third day, panic had fully set in. Rachel wasn't just avoiding me. She had disappeared. Her phone was still off, and there was no trace of her anywhere. I called the airline she said she was flying with, but they had no record of her booking a flight. I checked our joint bank account and saw no charges for tickets, hotels, or anything related to a trip. It was like she'd vanished into thin air. I spent hours combing through every detail I could think of, trying to piece together where she might have gone. I went through her drawers, her closet, even her emails. Something I'd never done before because I respected her privacy. But I was desperate. What I found only made things worse. There were no tickets, no plans, no group chats about a trip with her friends. There was nothing. I felt sick. My mind kept racing through every possibility. Was she in trouble? Was she lying to me? Was there someone else? I couldn't figure it out, and the not knowing was unbearable. For the first time in our 8 years of marriage, I realized I didn't know who Rachel really was. After Rachel disappeared, my life fell apart. At first, I was running on adrenaline, trying to track her down, convinced myself this was all some kind of misunderstanding. I called everyone I could think of, her parents, her sister, her friends, coworkers, anyone who might know where she was or why she left. Each conversation ended the same way, with confusion and concern. No one had heard from her. Her parents were just as shocked as I was, and her mom kept repeating, "This doesn't sound like Rachel," as though saying it would make her daughter reappear. I'd lie awake at night, staring at the ceiling, replaying every argument, every awkward silence, every moment where I might have missed a sign. I asked myself over and over, what did I do wrong? Was this my fault? The guilt was unbearable. I knew things hadn't been great between us lately, but was it so bad that she felt she had to leave like this? To vanish without a word? I convinced myself that if I could just figure out the moment it all went wrong, I could make sense of it, maybe even fix it. I barely slept. I barely ate. I called her phone at least 10 times a day, knowing full well it would go straight to voicemail. I left her messages, pleading for her to call me back, to just let me know she was okay. I checked her social media accounts constantly, hoping for any activity, but there was nothing. It was like she had erased herself from my life completely. I even filed a missing person report with the police, but they didn't take it seriously. She's an adult, they told me. It sounds like she left of her own accord. I hated how cold and clinical they made it sound, as if her walking out on me was just a normal, everyday thing. The days blurred together, and my routine became robotic. Get up, stare at my phone, go to work, come home, repeat. Work was the only thing keeping me afloat, though I could feel myself slipping there too. My manager pulled me aside once, asking if everything was okay. I lied, of course, said I was just dealing with some personal stuff, but I could tell he didn't buy it. I didn't care. I was too consumed by Rachel, by her absence, by the gaping hole she'd left in my life. I stopped seeing friends. The few times they reached out, I brushed them off with excuses about being too busy. I couldn't bear the thought of explaining what had happened. How could I tell people that my wife, the woman I'd loved and built a life with, had just disappeared? The embarrassment alone was suffocating. It felt like a reflection of me, like her leaving was some kind of proof that I wasn't enough. Months passed, and the depression hit me like a freight train. I stopped cleaning the apartment, letting dishes pile up in the sink and laundry gather dust in the corner. I'd go entire weekends without leaving the couch, cycling through the same 3 TV shows just to drown out the silence. I even stopped calling Rachel. What was the point? She clearly didn't want to be found. The messages I'd left her by then had gone from desperate pleas to angry rants. I hated her for what she'd done to me, but even more, I hated myself for still loving her. The nights were the worst, lying in bed alone, staring at her empty side, imagining all the places she could be, all the reasons she might have left. Was she with someone else? Was I just some chapter she'd decided to close? The idea that I'd been discarded so easily was soul-crushing. I'd lie there for hours, my mind spiraling until the exhaustion finally knocked me out. And even then, my dreams were filled with her. Her voice, her laugh, her scent. Waking up felt like losing her all over again. For a long time, I didn't think I'd ever get past it. I was stuck in this loop of pain and self-pity, convinced my life was over. But one morning, I woke up to a quiet apartment, sunlight streaming through the blinds, and I realized something. Rachel wasn't coming back. No amount of guilt, anger, or heartbreak was going to change that. I could spend the rest of my life waiting for answers that might never come, or I could try to rebuild, piece by piece, the life she'd left behind. It wasn't a sudden shift, but more like the first step after sitting still for too long. I started small, cleaning the apartment, cooking real meals instead of microwaving frozen dinners. I called up a friend who I hadn't spoken to in months and told him everything. It was messy, emotional, and awkward, but it was also the first time I'd felt even a sliver of relief. I started going back to the gym, not because of Rachel's old comments about my appearance, but because I needed to feel like I was doing something for myself. I told myself that moving on didn't mean forgetting her. I didn't have to pretend the last 8 years of my life hadn't happened. But I also couldn't let her absence define me. Rachel had made her choice and I had to make mine. For the first time in months, I felt like I was beginning to breathe again. It's strange how life starts to feel normal again, little by little. After months of being stuck in that fog of guilt and grief, I decided I couldn't keep living like that. Rachel was gone. I didn't know where she was or why she'd left, and as much as it hurt, I realized I couldn't keep letting her absence control my life. So I made a decision. I'd rebuild. Not for anyone else, but for me. The first thing I did was dust off my running shoes. Jogging used to be my thing. Back in college, I'd run almost every day, and it was my way of clearing my head. But somewhere along the way, maybe after getting married, maybe after all the stress with Rachel, I'd let it fall to the side. I still remember the first time I hit the pavement again. It was brutal. My legs felt like jelly, my lungs burned, and I couldn't even make it a mile. But for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel trapped in my own thoughts. It was just me, the rhythm of my feet hitting the ground, and the cool morning air. From there, I signed up for a gym membership. It felt like a cliché at first, like one of those get over your breakup by getting shredded stories you hear about. But it wasn't about revenge or trying to win Rachel back. It was about feeling good in my own skin again. At first, I was intimidated, surrounded by people who looked like they belonged in a fitness magazine. But I stuck with it. Over time, I started to see changes, not just physically but mentally. I felt stronger, more capable, like I was finally in control of something. I also started picking up the books that had been gathering dust on my shelf. There was the stack of novels I'd always meant to read, but life kept getting in the way. One day, I sat down with a cup of coffee, opened the first one, and got lost in the story. For hours, I forgot about everything, the hurt, the anger, the questions. It became a habit. Every night before bed, I'd read a few chapters, and for the first time in months, I actually started to sleep through the night. Work became another outlet. I threw myself into my projects, staying late, taking on extra responsibilities. At first, it was just a way to distract myself, but it didn't take long for people to notice. My boss started giving me bigger assignments, and my coworkers began relying on me more. A few months later, I got called into a meeting and offered a promotion. It felt surreal. For so long, I'd been stuck in this place of feeling like a failure, like I wasn't good enough for Rachel or for anyone. But here was proof that I could succeed, that I could grow. I won't pretend it was all smooth sailing. There were still hard days, days where I'd see something that reminded me of Rachel, or hear a song that would take me back to when things were good between us. The ache didn't just vanish, but those moments started to feel less overwhelming. They stopped controlling me. Instead of dragging me down, they became reminders of how far I'd come. Slowly but surely, I began to build a life without her. I reconnected with friends I'd drifted away from, meeting them for drinks or inviting them over for dinner. I even started talking to my neighbors more, something I'd never really bothered with before. I found myself laughing again, genuinely laughing, and it hit me how long it had been since I'd felt that kind of joy. There was a part of me that still felt guilty for moving on, like I was betraying Rachel by letting go of the pain. But I had to remind myself that I wasn't forgetting her. I wasn't erasing our history or pretending it didn't matter. I was just choosing to live my life again, even if she wasn't part of it anymore. Every step I took, no matter how small, felt like a victory. I wasn't the same person I'd been when Rachel left, and maybe that was a good thing. I was stronger now, more independent. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I could see a future for myself. One that didn't rely on anyone else to make it worthwhile. 3 years. That's how long it had been since Rachel vanished from my life. 3 years of picking up the pieces, rebuilding myself, and learning how to exist without her. 3 years of silence. No explanations, no apologies. Just the void she left behind. I'd worked so hard to move on, to find some kind of peace. And I thought I had, until the night she showed up at my door. It was late, maybe 9 p.m., and I was in the middle of folding laundry. The knock startled me. I wasn't expecting anyone. For a second, I wondered if it might be a neighbor or maybe a package delivery. But something about it, 3 deliberate knocks, made me freeze. I don't know why, but my chest tightened, and my gut told me something was off. When I opened the door, my heart nearly stopped. There she was, Rachel. She looked different. Her hair was shorter, her face thinner, and there was a weariness in her eyes I didn't remember. But it was her. Before I could even register the shock of seeing her again, my eyes dropped to what she was holding. A baby. A little boy, no more than a few months old, cradled in her arms. I stood there, frozen, 1,000 questions swirling in my head. For a moment, neither of us said anything. She just looked at me, and I could see tears welling up in her eyes. "Michael," she finally said, her voice cracking. "Can I come in?" I didn't move. Couldn't. Felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. What are you doing here? I managed to stammer, my voice barely above a whisper. She shifted the baby in her arms, her expression pleading. I know this is a shock, she said. I didn't know where else to go. I made a mistake, Michael. Her voice broke, and she swallowed hard. I shouldn't have left. I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. 3 years of anger, heartbreak, and confusion came rushing back all at once. You shouldn't have left? I repeated, my voice rising. That's what you have to say to me after 3 years? No phone call, no explanation, no anything. And now you're here? With a baby? Her eyes dropped to the floor, and she nodded. I know I hurt you. I know I messed everything up. But I need you to understand why I left. Yeah, I said bitterly, crossing my arms. I'd love to hear this. She hesitated, looking down at the baby, who was fussing quietly. I left because I wanted a child, she admitted, her voice barely audible. I couldn't handle the idea of not being a mother. And when we found out about your fertility issues, she paused, biting her lip. I felt trapped, like my dreams were slipping away, and I couldn't stop them. I stared at her, my jaw clenched, trying to process what she was saying. She continued, her words tumbling out in a rush. I met someone, Michael, a man who promised me everything I thought I wanted. A family, stability, a chance to be a mom. I was selfish, and I left because I thought he could give me the life I dreamed of. But he wasn't who I thought he was. Her voice cracked again, and tears spilled down her cheeks. He left me. As soon as I got pregnant, he decided he didn't want to be a father after all. I've been on my own ever since. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My wife, who had promised to love me, who had vowed to stick with me through anything, had left me because I couldn't give her a child. And now, after being abandoned by the man she left me for, she was back, standing on my doorstep, asking for what? Forgiveness? A second chance? I don't know what you want from me, Rachel, I said, my voice cold. You made your choice. You left. You threw everything we had away for some guy who could provide for you. And now that he's out of the picture, you think you can just come back? Like nothing happened. She shook her head, clutching the baby tighter. No, Michael, it's not like that. I've changed. I see now what I gave up, and I regret it every single day. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I want to try. I want us to be a family. You, me, and my son. Her words hit me like a ton of bricks. Her son, not ours. Her son with another man. She was asking me to step into a life I didn't sign up for, to clean up the mess she'd made after shattering my world. I can't do this, I said, shaking my head. You don't get to just waltz back into my life after 3 years and expect me to pick up the pieces. I've spent the last 3 years rebuilding myself, trying to move on from what you did to me. And now you're asking me to raise another man's child? Do you even hear yourself? Rachel started sobbing, tears streaming down her face. I know it's unfair. I know I hurt you more than I can ever make up for. But I still love you, Michael. I never stopped loving you. And I know deep down you still love me too. Her words hung in the air, and for a moment, I felt like I couldn't breathe. Did I still love her? Maybe a part of me did, buried under all the anger and hurt. But love wasn't enough, not after everything she'd done. Not after she'd abandoned me when I needed her most. I can't do this, Rachel, I said finally, my voice firm. You made your choice and I made mine. I've moved on. I'm not the same person I was when you left, and I'm not going to let you drag me back into that pain. I hope you find happiness, but it won't be with me. She looked at me, her face crumpling, and for a split second, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. But then I thought about all the nights I'd spent alone, wondering what I'd done to deserve being left behind. I thought about the years I'd spent clawing my way out of the darkness she'd thrown me into, and I knew I was doing the right thing. Rachel didn't say anything else. She just nodded, tears streaming down her face, and turned to leave. As I closed the door behind her, I felt a strange mix of emotions. Relief, sadness, and maybe even a little closure. She was gone again, but this time I wasn't broken. I was free. As Rachel stood there, pleading with me to let her back into my life, I could feel a storm of emotions churning inside me. Anger, sadness, disbelief. But one thing stood out above it all: clarity. For the first time since she left, I saw her for who she truly was. Not the woman I'd once loved, but the person who had made her choice and expected me to pick up the pieces when it all fell apart. And I wasn't going to do it. "I've listened to everything you had to say, Rachel." I began, my voice steady. "But I need you to understand something. You made this choice. You walked out on me. You left me to figure out how to rebuild my life while you went off chasing what you thought you deserved. And now that it didn't work out, you're standing here asking me to fix it all? That's not how this works." Her face crumpled as I spoke, but I didn't stop. Couldn't stop. For 3 years, I've been trying to pick myself up from the mess you left behind. And do you know what? I finally did it. I've rebuilt my life without you. I've worked too hard, fought through too much pain to go back now. I'm not going to undo all of that just because you've realized you made a mistake. Rachel's tears started flowing freely, but her expression shifted. Less regretful, more defensive. "I had to leave, Michael," she snapped. "You wouldn't understand what it was like for me. I wanted a child, a family, and you couldn't give me that. You couldn't give me the one thing I've always wanted." I felt my stomach churn at her words, but I kept my composure. "You're right," I said evenly. "I couldn't give you a child, but what I could give you was love, loyalty, and a life together. And you threw that away. You didn't even give us a chance to figure it out. You didn't stay. You didn't fight. You just left. And now you want me to clean up the wreckage of your decisions? That's not love, Rachel. That's selfishness." Her eyes narrowed, and suddenly, the tears stopped. I saw a flash of the Rachel I'd known during the worst days of our marriage. The one who knew how to twist the knife when she didn't get her way. "You're the selfish one," she spat. "You're so focused on punishing me that you can't see what really matters. We could have a second chance, Michael. We could be a family. I'm standing here, asking for your forgiveness, and you won't even consider it. After all the years we spent together, this is how you repay me." I felt a surge of anger rising in my chest. "Repay you?" I said, incredulous. "Rachel, I was nothing but good to you. I stood by you when we were trying to have kids. Even when things got hard. I supported you, loved you, and did everything I could to make you happy. And when things didn't go the way you wanted, you left. You left me without so much as a goodbye. Don't talk to me about repayment. You have no idea what I went through after you walked out that door." Her face hardened, and I could see the wheels turning in her mind. "Fine," she said coldly. "If that's how you want to play it. Maybe I made a mistake coming here, thinking you'd grown into a better person. You're just as cold and selfish as you were before. But don't forget we're still legally married. And if you're going to throw me out like this, maybe I should remind you what divorce court looks like. I'm entitled to half of everything you've built, Michael." I couldn't help but laugh, though there was no humor in it. "Are you seriously threatening me right now?" I asked. "You walked out on this marriage. You abandoned me. If you think you're going to waltz back into my life and walk out with half of what I've earned, you're even more delusional than I thought." Her jaw clenched, and for a moment, I thought she might say something else, but she didn't. I took a deep breath and stepped toward the door. "I'm done, Rachel. You made your choice, and now you have to live with it. I've moved on. You should too." I opened the door, gesturing for her to leave. She stared at me, her expression a mix of anger and desperation, but she didn't move. "Please, Michael," she whispered, her voice cracking. "I know I hurt you, but I need you. My son needs you." Her words hung in the air, but they didn't sway me. I looked at her, feeling a strange sense of finality. "You needed me 3 years ago, Rachel. Not now. This is your life, your choice, your responsibility. I'm not going to fix this for you." She stood there for a moment longer, her eyes searching mine for any sign of weakness. But there was none. I was done being her safety net. Without another word, she turned and walked out into the night, clutching the baby to her chest. I closed the door behind her and leaned against it, letting out a long, shaky breath. I felt a pang of sadness, yes, but also a sense of relief. For the first time in years, I felt like I'd truly taken control of my life. Rachel was gone again, but this time it was on my terms. And I knew I'd made the right decision. After Rachel left for the second time, I thought that would be the end of it. But I underestimated the ripple effect she would leave in her wake. Within days, her parents started calling me. At first, they were polite, asking if I would reconsider, saying Rachel was struggling and needed my help. But when I told them my decision was final, the tone shifted. They accused me of being heartless, of abandoning Rachel in her time of need. Her mom even had the audacity to say, "You're her husband. You're supposed to take care of her, no matter what." It wasn't just her family, either. Mutual friends I hadn't heard from in years suddenly crawled out of the woodwork, calling, texting, even showing up unannounced. They said things like, "Come on, Michael. She's learned her lesson," or, "You're really going to let her raise that baby alone?" Every conversation felt like a thinly veiled guilt trip. But I wasn't budging. The thing was, I'd already spent years sacrificing myself for Rachel. I'd given her everything I had, emotionally, mentally, financially, and she'd thrown it all away without a second thought. I wasn't about to let her or anyone else pull me back into that chaos. I'd made my decision, and no amount of pressure was going to change it. At first, I felt a flicker of doubt. I'm human. These were people I'd once been close to, and their words weren't easy to brush off. But every time I felt that pang of guilt, I reminded myself of the truth. Rachel had made her choices. She'd walked out on me, not the other way around. She'd only come back because her backup plan had failed, and she wanted me to clean up the mess. That wasn't love. That was desperation, and I wasn't her safety net anymore. Once her family and friends realized I wasn't going to cave, the calls and messages eventually stopped. The silence was a relief, like a weight had finally been lifted off my shoulders. I don't know what happened to Rachel after that. I didn't ask, and I didn't want to know. She was no longer my problem. For the first time in years, I felt completely free. Life now is peaceful, simple. It's funny how much lighter everything feels when you're no longer carrying the weight of someone else's drama. I wake up each morning without dread, without wondering what kind of emotional minefield I might step into that day. I focus on my work, my hobbies, my health, on me, and it feels incredible. I've started traveling again, something I hadn't done in years. I spent 2 weeks hiking in the Rockies last summer, just me and the mountains, and it was the most alive I've felt in ages. I've made new friends, strengthened old connections, and even started dating again. Not seriously, but enough to remind myself what it feels like to be with someone who doesn't bring constant chaos into my life. It's strange to look back on everything that happened with Rachel. For so long, I thought of her as my future, my partner, my everything. And when she left, I thought I'd never recover from it. But now, I see her leaving as the best thing that ever happened to me. She forced me to rebuild, to find myself again, and to realize that I don't need someone else to complete me. I'm not angry anymore. I don't hate her. Honestly, I don't feel much of anything when I think about her. She's a chapter in my life that's closed now, and I'm okay with that. I don't wish her harm, but I also don't wish her back into my life. I've learned to protect my peace, and I'll never let anyone take that away from me again. So here I am, free, calm, and happy. Life isn't perfect, but it's mine, and that's enough.